What if Loki is actually a dark version of Shanks? And what if this view of Loki helps us understand what Roger told Shanks that made him cry? Let's get into it. So Shanks didn't just show up out of nowhere from random whatever the fuck island. He was found by Roger as a baby during the God Valley incident, meaning he was literally born into the Celestial Dragon world, then raised by the Pirate King himself. That already puts him in a whole different league from any other Yonko except for God King Buggy, of course. And at some point, Shanks actually went back to Mary Joie according to Shamrock, then strolled right the fuck off. We don't know why or what he saw there when he got there, but he traded that lifestyle to be a bum at the pirate streets. Not because he had to, but because he freely chose to. Now that we know Shanks was called the Child of Destiny, which is a very flattering version of the name Loki was burdened with, that name sounds pretty big, even if he doesn't go by it anymore. And add that to everything else we've learned about Shanks recently. The Celestial Dragon bloodline, the Figarland name, the twin brother twist, and suddenly, Shanks isn't just the guy who gave up his arm for Luffy. He's someone the old crew, including Buggy, bet on. Like, they really thought he was the one to carry the torch. But then there's Luffy, and this is where it gets interesting. Shanks didn't plan for him to eat the fruit. That wasn't some master plan. You might as well call it a glitch in the Matrix, because Luffy didn't wait for some inherited rule to be explained. He saw the fruit, he pressed X to eat, and now he's a god. One Piece in a nutshell. Just doing what he felt was right in the moment, even if that wasn't supposed to happen. And I feel like that resonated a lot with Shanks, especially if he had actual plans with the Gum Gum fruit. So if Shanks chose to walk away from Destiny, why is Oda bringing up that old title? And what does it even mean to be the Child of Destiny or Fate? Because way before Luffy showed up, Shanks was already propped up as Roger's successor, and yet he didn't follow through. He kept it low-key. And that's why the concept of Loki as a dark reflection of Shanks isn't merely intriguing, but it actually makes more sense than Loki being a dark reflection of Luffy. Think about it. Both were born into privilege, Loki being an actual prince and Shanks as a celestial dragon, although for probably the first 0.5 seconds of his life, they both turned away from it. Loki gets hit with a prophecy saying he'll kill his dad and gets treated like a threat. Shanks goes back to Mary Joie, confronts his past, and just walks away. But the reaction they get is completely different. Shanks grows up to be a respected OG legend. Loki gets labeled as the world's worst son. So what's the point here? Why is one being praised while the other is being pushed aside? Maybe it's because Shanks had Roger's legacy backing him. He got to choose when to show up, when to step back. Loki didn't get that luxury. He's stuck playing out the role he never asked for, being prophesized as the daddy killer. Speaking of legacy though, we should mention an important moment. Roger returning from Laugh Tale and speaking to Shanks, who ends up crying. We still don't know what he said, but it clearly had an impact. Some people believe Roger told him, "You're not the guy." But what if there is more to it? What if Roger revealed something important to him? Maybe Roger told Shanks about his family background, explaining that he was a celestial dragon born into privilege and a history that Joy Boy was meant to challenge. Perhaps Roger urged him to see that world, to go to Mary Joie, to witness the environment that he was supposed to belong to, and decided that's who he wanted to be. And after seeing it, maybe Shanks chose to step back and not follow in Roger's footsteps, taking on the role of Joy Boy or the next Roger. Considering his background wouldn't feel like a rebellion, it would feel like adopting a new label without any real change. It's like putting a new name on an old oppressor. It reminds me a bit of Fisher Tiger because he suffered under a flawed system and had the choice to pass on his anger, but didn't. Fisher Tiger didn't want the children of Fishman Island to inherit his resentment. So I think in Shanks' mind, he didn't want the world to carry a Joy Boy image shaped by Celestial Dragon ancestry. So instead of becoming the next Joy Boy or the next Roger, Shanks lays the groundwork. He clears the path. He nurtures a world that someone else, someone freer than him, can inherit. That would be Luffy. That makes the sacrifice of his arm hit even harder when you realize that it is the same arm with the mark, the very same mark shown on Summers' armband, implying that this mark is a symbol of either the God's Knights or the mark granted by Emu to use the Abyss. Whichever it may be, sacrificing that arm is the ultimate rejection of the Celestial Dragon lineage. So while Shanks chose to step back, Loki never had the chance to properly respond to the role of the accursed prince that was forced upon him. Lacking a mentor like Roger, he couldn't reject his fate. His whole role was imposed on him, and now he's fighting back in the only way he knows. In my view, his desire to destroy the world is a way for him to reclaim the identity of the Accursed Prince, thereby allowing him to control the narrative. So I think initially Oda wanted us to believe that Loki was a darker version of Luffy, but over time he started to peel back the layers. This, combined with the Shanks material we've been receiving, builds up to characterizing Loki as a version of Shanks that could have been a much angrier and more hostile take on his character. And this is where it gets even messier, because if Shanks did give up on being the one to succeed Roger, then what is he doing now in the Final Saga, saying that he's making his move to claim the One Piece? It almost feels like he's trying to close the loop. Like, after all this time setting the stage, watching, waiting, keeping the peace, he's stepping in one last time to make sure the right pieces are in place to ensure the path remains open for someone like Luffy. So there's definitely a weird and interesting split between Shanks and Loki. One plays defense, the other plays offense. But they're both reacting to the same pressure, a world that told them what they're supposed to be. Shanks had the option to chase it all. He was supposed to be Roger's successor and was trusted with a hat, but he passed it on. Loki didn't get that option. No hat, no dream, just a prophecy hanging over his head. And according to the prophecy, you should like the video and subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying this discussion. Now back to Loki. Because if you grow up with a prophecy that says you're gonna kill your dad, if the world already sees you that way, then why not lean in? Because it's not just about power, it's about giving people a chance to tell their stories, especially those who have fought hard for that chance. But that's what makes Shanks such a sharp foil, because he was born into the Celestial Dragon bloodline, and yet he walked away from it. That's where the title Child of Destiny begins to make more sense as a birthright he rejects. Because what's cool about the term Destiny in the context of One Piece is that the title of chapter 559 is called Destiny. The Romanized interpretation for Destiny used for that chapter title is the Japanese word Tenmei, which means Heaven's Decree or Divine Mandate. Something that, if you're catching on, should remind you of the Celestial Dragons. Also makes even more sense as to why Shanks learned Divine Departure. However, if we're referencing the Viz translation where it calls Shanks the Child of Fate, the Japanese word for fate is Unmei. From what I understand, Tenmei and Unmei essentially mean the same thing, destiny and fate, you know? However, the nuanced differences are that Tenmei is more aligned with divinity and fixed paths, while Unmei emphasizes having agency over one's destiny through choices and actions. This suggests that since we're discussing Shanks in this manner, it makes even more sense why he was called the Child of Destiny or the Child of Fate, because both definitions of the Japanese terms apply to Shanks. For Shanks, refusing the divine right, turning his back on the system that birthed them, and still choosing to raise the next generation Luffy, I think it redefines what it means to be the child of fate and destiny. It's not about blindly following some divine plan, it's about being in a powerful position and choosing not to follow that expected path. Yet at the same time, that still makes you a child of destiny because your choices, in this case, Shanks' choice to reject his Celestial Dragon lineage, are influenced by the impact of his destiny and the circumstances of being born a Celestial Dragon. It's what makes Shanks so legendary, not just for who he is, but for what he could have been and chose not to become. And this is where Harold becomes a real pivot, because back when he was 45, 15 in human years if I understood that correctly, Harold ruled Elbaf with his big dick swinging. The streets flinched when he blinked. That flashback in chapter 1152 shows it clearly. He was the reason Elbaf gained its reputation as a land not to be trifled with. The kind of king who didn't want peace.
I don't want peace. I want problems, always!
The total opposite of how he was characterized earlier on in the Elbaf Arc. Something landed in his lap to change him drastically. We don't know what caused it. It could have been love. It could have been fatherhood. It could have been regret. However, the same king who built a kingdom on war eventually began walking a different path, not just pulling back from battles, but turning his back on what being a giant used to mean. That's what makes the prophecy about Loki so strange, because Harold didn't just pass it on, he created it. He's the one who said Loki would kill him one day. And by the looks of chapter 1152, that didn't really happen, or at the very least, didn't seem to happen. And the crazy part is that we still don't know why he made the prophecy. And then there's the matter of him ripping off his horns just to make a statement that he's not like the ancient giants. He just sent his DNA results back with a no thanks and Sharpie. But here's where I see Harold being this failed version of Roger. By all accounts, from what we know so far, it doesn't sound like Harold ever helped Loki make sense of the prophecy. He gave Loki no future to believe in. The prophecy stuck, and Loki was left to carry the weight of both without a guide. Don't get me wrong, Harold seemed to love Loki. He loved him and Hadruden, but I don't know, breaking to the world that your son is going to kill you and have the entire country treat him like a pariah, I wouldn't call that a fatherly gesture. And that's where Harold really breaks from Roger, because Roger, right or wrong, told Shanks something, probably that he is a celestial dragon or whatever, but it was something. It gave Shanks an answer, even if it hurt, even if it made him step back. That's why he didn't chase after the One Piece right after Roger's execution. He wasn't confused about his role, but Loki, I don't think he ever understood the prophecy fully. He was never told, here's what it means, let me spell it out for you, let me put you on some real game real quick about the prophecy. So if Harold failed to give Loki clarity, Loki probably looked somewhere else for the light. And who does he find? Rox, someone who hated the system so much that he wanted to be king of the world. For Loki, that kind of rage makes sense. It's the first voice that truly reflects how you feel. Because if you grow up with a prophecy that says you're going to destroy everything, and your father can't even face you after saying it, then yeah, maybe you start to believe that you ain't built to be a good guy, that you're the reason the good guys gotta show up. It explains so much about why Loki looks up to Rox. Maybe it even clarifies why Blackbeard admires Rox to the extent of following in his footsteps. Perhaps Blackbeard experienced something similar to Loki. It ultimately shows how Elbaf presents us with two paths. One where a person is given the room to shape their destiny like Shanks, and another where the story is forced upon them like Loki. And if stories can have such an impact and ruin lives, could Emu's power work similarly? Not through demon magic, just a devil fruit shaped by the world's greatest fear, as I explain in this video here.